This is Shelley Kraft coming to you live on SNN Live. We're coming to you live from the Precious Metals Summit in Beaver Creek, Colorado, 2016. We're going to do a Wall Street view with Eric Lemieux of EBL Consultants. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Lemieux, welcome to SNN Live.
Well, thank you for having me over.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I called upon you to come and do an interview with me because your work as an analyst in resource industry is well known. So I wanted to get you on camera and ask you a couple of questions, but before we do, give us an overview on what you do, and then we'll get into what you think.
Yep. Long story short is I'm a professional geologist, educated in the province of Quebec, so I've got that French side in me. Did a bachelor's, master's degree in geology. Went to the Colorado School of Mine, did a degree in mineral economics. That opened up, the financial aspects of the mining industry. This is BRIEX happened. I joined the Montreal Stock Exchange. I was for a time in my professional career a regulator, and then about in 2008, a banker from Laurentian Bank Securities in Montreal called me, and he was looking for an analyst, and I joined Laurentian Bank Securities as a sell-side mining analyst. And so that's what I've been doing pretty much for the last few years. More recently with Peartree Securities. I'm more of an explorationist. I like looking at the early stage plays. Most important thing for me is management, and sort of event like we have over here at Beaver Creek. It's a good opportunity to see the people in the industry, and so that, in a nutshell, is my experience as an analyst.
Now, many analysts are technical, many analysts are fundamental. Somewhere in the resource industry, I find them to be almost down the middle because they're looking at history and they're also looking at, perspectives that have to do with what's going on that day in the trading and the volume and the price of an underlying commodity. So what are your kind of like picayune things that you look at first?
Well, I just said it. I mean, management, I think, is the most important thing. I remember when I was doing the interview for the VP of Laurentian Bank Securities, and he asked me, what was the most important thing when you look at a company? And I was trying to be academic and say, well, it's, the future cash flows and blah, 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 my limited knowledge of finance. And, he looked at me and he said, there's three things: management, management, management. And that rang a bell with me, and it is true. And I talked a bit of my history. I did work for industry. I did do the drilling programs out in the boonies. Worked for companies like Cambial and Aranda, and you realize that it's a people thing. Fundamentally, it's a people thing. And then after that, in exploration, it's luck. You got to confess that it's luck. And if you want to be lucky, well, you got to do the things that will put the probabilities on your side. And that's why I always come to the notion that you're right. I mean, as an analyst, we look at the numbers, we look at the past, we look at the future, but it all comes down to who's behind that. And once in a while, effectively, you can hit a team that's able to have good success, and it's repeatable. So it's interesting.
Let's take a macro look at the micro industry. 30,000 feet. What do you see going on in the industry? What's happened over the course of the last 12 months? Because things are different.
Things are very different. I mean, I make the metaphor that, the tide had pulled away. The last 3-4 years, it was tough. You look back in December of 2015, it was totally morose. Everybody was, down in the pits. Everybody was saying we're near the bottom, but it never really happened. And like I said, the tide had pulled away. Nothing was left floating. And if you look at the last 6 months, 7 months, 9 months, well, it's totally changed. Tide has come back in. Everything has sort of risen. And it's a fundamental change. I remember here at Beaver Creek last year, there was some very good quality companies. This is what I sort of wrote, or was my impression was, what we had over here last year was the cream of the cream. And this year you see there's a regain of energy. But you see, again, it's the cream of the cream. And I think what's important now is to really understanding that the tide has come back. I don't know for how long, it's hard to say, but I think it's based on fundamentals. But it's to decipher who's going to remain floating and rise, and those who will sink back. Because, as I said, the tide came up, and everybody, or most of the companies, issuers, rose with this sort of renewed energy, or renewed better fundamentals, basically.
What's your first love? Let me finish the question. Exploration, development, or production companies?
I'm an explorationist, so I have to confess my first love is exploration. I always give this analogy of you never know what you might stumble on, and we know the history that there's been these discoveries that have led to these company makers. And I mentioned earlier on Noranda. I mean, Noranda was the Wayne Noranda camp in the Abitibi in Quebec, and it was a copper discovery done by Mr. Horn back in, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 1900s, and it turned out to be Noranda, which was one of the bigger Canadian companies. Now things changed in the mining industry, but yeah, I would say exploration, development is important too, production obviously, but I think the whole nut and bolts of this industry is based on exploration. What is the next thing in the pipeline? And as an analyst, this is what I always try to tell people: is I'm interested to know what's ahead of the curve, and exploration I think is a great part of that.
So when you're interviewing a CEO or management team, and usually there's a GO in the mix, when you hear them tell you about an anomaly, and you want to look at their potential drill program, you want to look at those key little elements, how would you advise an investor from outside the realm? What should, beyond management now, let's get past the management, because now we're assuming that management has credibility. Now what is the next focus? And I'm bringing up the resource itself. I'm bringing up feasibility. I'm bringing into it, any seismic. You're free to say whatever you want to tell me.
Well, it's a very good question, and it's not easy to answer, because what you realize is we're dealing with geology. And with geology, you're dealing with Mother Nature, and there's so many parameters that are unknown, first of all, and elements that are unique for each project. So it is effectively, you look at anomaly, it's a geophysical anomaly. What does that exactly imply? You have to put it into proper context. You have to look at, if there's geochemistry, if there's structural geology, what is the historical works, and that's why you need expertise. And I understand, the average investor, it's not always easy to sort of get an opinion on that, but it comes with time. And even as an expert, sometimes you base your opinion on limited data, and sometimes we do make mistakes. And so I think what's important is to, one, the devil's in the details, and that's part of the fact that we can't negate. And after that is to follow the story. And I think where, as an analyst, I've come to have a certain opinion is we have to have a long-term perspective. And I think as an industry, we might have been penalized in the past or did things wrong where we had this short-term thinking, and it penalized in the long term. And so I think as an investor, is to look at a situation or look at an issuer, but take the time and realize that if you take a snapshot at moment A, it might not be the correct assessment you're going to get. And so, yes, I think it's like falling in love. You gotta date. You've got to look at it. You've got to mature with it, and eventually you'll get a good image of what's going on. And if it's a go, you go, and be there for the long term. I think that's what's important.
Do you have a district that's a favorite, or are you because there's so much going on all over the world now. I mean, nobody's staying put in North America, really. So what do you think of the regions that are up-and-comers?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, being from Quebec, I've got a weakness for my home province, and that's where, it's my backyard, and it has been on the radar screen when Virginia Mines made the discovery of the Eleanor deposit, but it's been sort of on the back burner. I still think recently there's some new stuff that's coming out that's very interesting. So I do have a weakness for the James Bay area, which is northern Quebec. And if we get into the geopolitics and stuff like that, stable jurisdictions, I still think North America is an interesting part, or an interesting jurisdiction. I recall when I was working early in my career, I really saw the migration from the companies that started to look into South America, Chile, Argentina. I was part of that, saw that process of where the major companies in North America started to look into South America. And that was normal, because that's where the big porphyry deposits were. And so it was this rush of leaving a stable jurisdiction to go to the better jurisdiction in terms of size. And so there was really this, in this industry, a movement towards bigger is better. And that led to what we have today, where, yes, effectively we see what happens in South America. There's some interesting stuff. But North America was sort of left behind, apart from maybe from Nevada. And it's interesting to see now today maybe this return to what I would call to the sources, which is, North America, certain other jurisdictions that have been under the radar screen. And case in point, I'll name British Columbia. The last 3-4 years, we've seen the Yukon as being one of the interesting jurisdictions that are up and emerging. Obviously, Ontario has been one of the stronger ones also. In America, well, what I find interesting is you saw in 2008 when, the floor left us. There was, I think, a perceived change. I remember when I was a student at the Colorado School of Mines, we had a case-in-point example of South Carolina being a jurisdiction that wasn't very amenable to mining in the industry. And I made reference to 2008 where, when the states, there was issues in terms of economics, well, people started to realize that, maybe natural resources are important. And so there was a change in South Carolina. And you saw companies like... here again, I got a memory bank. I think it was Remarco that came back, and the people there were ready to have them with open arms. So it's just a testament that things change in the industry and jurisdictions change. And so to answer your questions, I think, for me, one of my favorite spots right now is effectively North America. Now, I say that because I've roamed about that, a little bit less in South America, a little bit less in Africa. Maybe in Europe too. I was a few years ago back in Portugal, and again, Portugal, there was some issues in terms of their economy, and you could see that perception when I met the Minister of Mines there, that there was a perception that yes, mining could maybe contribute, even though the Romans were there way back. There was this renewed interest of let's maybe be amenable to mining, and that will probably be lead to enrichment of the whole society.
So, Eric, let's give out a place to go, a website for people to find out more information about you and read your writing.
Sure. I'm an independent analyst for Peartree Securities based in Toronto. They have a website at www.peartreesecurities.com, and there is a subset where there's resource analysis, and you can find my writings there. Quite technical, quite detailed on specific issuers, but sometimes I do have 3-4 issuers covered in a general theme. And there is our perspective newsletter where we just touch on general basis. And so, yes, that would be the website that I can forward you to.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Lemieux from EBL Consultants. This was a Wall Street View conducted at Precious Metals Summit in Beaver Creek, Colorado, 2016. I'm Shelley Kraft. This is SNN Live, and we came to you live from the summit in Beaver Creek, Colorado.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci, monsieur.